welcome back to the class, everyone. We're officially kicking off 2025, and I know I've been kind of out of the scene for a little bit. We were sick for a couple of weeks, and then it took me a lot longer than I wanted to get back into the routine of things. But we are back, and we are kicking off the year with everybody's favorite thing in Galaxy of Heroes, Fleet. Now, when looking back on 2024, it definitely seems, and probably is the case, that Fleet was heavily neglected by the developers, in the fact that we only actually got 2 ships added, neither of which were capital ships, to the entire game. Punishing One being one of the more recent ones, and at the very beginning of the year, the Comeuppance also came into the game. And when I first started thinking over this, I was like, oh, we really don't need to talk about this. Nothing's really changed. 2 ships doesn't really change the entirety of the meta and really, the 10 existing fleets out there. Boy, was I wrong. Once I actually started getting into the nitty-gritty of everything that the Punishing One changed, I don't think a position of a single fleet here has stayed the same, with the exception that the Leviathan is still the most dominant fleet of all. And in fact, that's actually gotten a little bit worse, hence the buffed question mark. But at any rate, I want to be talking over all of them again in relation to another. Again, this is very PvP oriented, so we're going to go through and say which ones are best for you to be working towards, and even then, where are they shining best with the comps that they're using. So first off, it's Leviathan. I mean, Leviathan was always the strongest fleet, or at least has been for really the last 1.5 years or almost 2 years now that it's been out. I will say one of the things that has changed specifically about its comp is that really end-all be-all starting comp is going to involve Dagger. That was a little bit different a year ago, or at least a year ago when this video was made, because there were a lot of strategies that utilized having Sith Fighter in the starting lineup to be able to gain turn meter. TIE Dagger now stops turn meter, meaning that anyone starting Sith Fighter is pretty much doing it for no gain at all. So universally, this is just the best comp, both offensively and defensively, beating everything and holding against almost anything in the same regard. I will say a lot of people are trying to do a scimitar only reinforcement. I would avoid against that. I realize what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the scimitar to come out immediately to give the speed boost, and because it is a very low reinforcement, that pushes it up to the top. That does heavily open it up to a mace counter that we'll talk about later that normally doesn't function all that well. Now, in second place is going to be a new addition, and we already kind of briefly talked about it, but that is the fact that Executor, with the help of Punishing One, has launched itself into that second best fleet category where Profundity used to be. And the reason for this is, quite frankly, that the Punishing One, man, the kit's just stupid. Like, we're not going to go into all the details of it, but realistically, the Executor only needed 1 or 2 things to change some of the matchups. The Punishing One came in with several. One of the most relevant is the fact that it's going to actually give speed to the capital ship of, or its own capital ship being Executor. That immediately starts crossing out a lot of our previous counters that we had, or at least in the previous forms that they existed. Now, things like Profundity as well as Empire and Galactic Republic, while they still can kind of beat it in some circumstances, it is incredibly harder, really cementing its place on defense, although granted, it was kind of always on defense to begin with. As far as overall comps go, the one that I'm currently showing is probably universally the best for defense. One thing that you can do that'll help its win rates a little bit, or rather its hold rates, is if you remove Slave 1 and you just relieve these 5, it actually makes it a little bit harder for the mace fleets that we're going to talk about here in a second to actually take it down. That's because when Slave 1 comes out, it just does so much less than, say, Xanadu Blood would do. Xanadu Blood coming out very early and getting its reinforcement ability on the field doesn't necessarily shut down the Galactic Republic fleets, but it does make it a lot harder, particularly the fact that all Scoundrel allies get Retribution for 2 turns, and since the team is essentially made up of Scoundrels, it's going to give them all Retribution, make them a lot harder to kill because they will be going back and hitting back, and Houndstooth will be cleansing every single time it does just because of what its basic is doing. So overall, Executor was third place previously, is going to be moving up to the second best fleet in game, primarily on defense, but it still can do some fun things on offense. Now, for the third and fourth place, I'm actually going to say that Galactic Republic and the Profundity fleet are a tie. The reason why we put the Galactic Republic fleet visibly in third is because I really wanted to draw attention to it. By the way, that's also why Mace is currently leading the Galactic Republic fleet being shown, because I wanted to draw attention to him. Because while Negotiator is still ideal in some circumstances, at the end game level even, Mace has not really been doing anything relevant at all for a very long time, or at least in the last couple of years past. He's doing very relevant things right now. So this fleet that we're specifically talking about, that I've referenced a few times now actually, is one of the main fleets out there that is beating Executor. When you come in with Rex, Fives, and Marauder on the starting lineup, they have enough survivability to take the initial volley from the Executor. Then you can heal up Rex several times, both between Endurance and Marauder, and eventually overcome the enemy. And again, with Slave 1 coming out first, because a lot of people haven't learned to necessarily remove him, it makes it just that much easier. And it can actually win with just Xanadu Blood, and they actually did that over this last week. But the reason why they're kind of in the tied position here is because Galactic Republic is doing slightly more impressive things than Profundity on offense, and the Profundity is doing actually probably quite a bit more impressive things as far as overall defense goes. Like I said previously, the Galactic Republic fleets has an outside shot at both Executor, actually a pretty good shot at Executor, and an outside shot against Leviathan. Whereas Profundity really struggles versus pretty much all of the Punishing One comps with Executor, and really only has a good shot at taking down the Leviathan fleet if it's able to steal from your roster the Mark 6 Interceptor. And the reason for this is the Mark 6 Interceptor is another form of getting tenacity up to all of your allies, regardless of faction. So basically what you have to do is you have to steal a part of your Leviathan fleet to enable the Profundity fleet to beat the enemy Leviathan. A little bit complicated, not necessarily ideal in a lot of circumstances. However, when it comes to overall defensive viability, the Empire really has GK or Mace or any Galactic Republic fleet's number, and actually can be taken apart by some of the lesser fleets. Profundity, while it can actually also be beaten by Empire, it's really hard to whittle down one ship at a time. There's so much survivability in here. The Rebel Y-Wing is incredibly tanky. It's not a fleet that is easy to burn down, and while it can, or there are a lot of fleets that have an outside shot when they utilize TIE Bomber in the fleet with them, you only have one TIE Bomber. So if one of those fleets fails, it's not like you can continue to use 2 or 3 more afterwards. You could, if you use Resistance with TIE Bomber, then all of a sudden you can't use Malevolence with TIE Bomber, or you can't use another Empire team with TIE Bomber. And at the same time, the reason why TIE Bomber is in here is because one of the best uses for Profundity on offense is actually the mirror. And while you can win the mirror via coin flips of your Millennium Falcon, assisting more times, it's really nice to have TIE Bomber. If you do a Profundity mirror and you bring in TIE Bomber as your first reinforcement, and then hold the burning until the following turn to get even more burning, because they will start with it due to his reinforcement ability, you really just shut down the enemy team, even with the worst RNG possible. So again, Leviathan pretty comfortably in the first slot, Executor second slot, and then tied for third and fourth, I'm going to put both the Galactic Republic as well as Profundity fleets, with, of course, Galactic Republic being a little bit better on offense and Profundity being a little bit better on defense. Now, this next one makes me sad, because for a while there, with all the additions to the Empire and before pretty much the other fleets that we previously talked about got buffed, you were actually able to split Empire into 2 separate fleets to take down both Profundity as well as Executor. The reason why that's changed is because the Executor has been buffed in such a way that you really have to pull all of your tools together to be able to take it down. And that's, I mean, it's great that the Empire can still do that, but at the same time, it is just a little bit frustrating. So this overall comp that we're looking at right now, it's mostly being used right now to beat out Executor. It doesn't always work. It doesn't work as well as, say, the Negotiator or the Mace fleet does in a lot of circumstances, but it is still a pretty good tool you can use. Now, on top of that, if you want to swap out, say, Executrix for Thrawn, it actually has really good win rates against the Negotiator fleet as well. And there is even a fleet you can put together here. I can probably actually do it very quickly with Executor, where we can utilize Gauntlet as well as the shuttle, and then reinforce with TIE Bomber, assuming you're not using that with Profundity, to actually beat out the enemy Profundity. So very, very versatile when it comes to overall offensive tools. Not as much as, say, the Negotiator fleet is, and it's going to be even more flawed than Negotiator in the sense of defense, where Malevolence can actually beat it out. Where ever since Marauder has come into the game for the Galactic Republic fleet, a lot of those simpler counters like Malevolence or First Order have essentially entirely been shut down. So it's going to be coming in overall 5th place. And I feel like from here, there's a pretty big drop-off in the overall meta to the following 3 fleets. These are really cemented in the end game, and then you start to get a little bit less so with the next couple ones. Next one is going to be Malevolence. Man, this fleet needs help. I'll probably do a wish list for 2025 at some point, but if one fleet needs help right now, I really would vote for Malevolence. I guess it doesn't help the fact that I'm a prequel fanboy and I love everything revolving around that timeline, but at the same time, like, even the fleets below it, who arguably need the love more, they've gotten reinforcements between the bombers and comeuppance, or the shuttle for First Order, and it really needs some help. And I guess you could make the argument that we could also use Red 5, which that's a great argument. But at the same time, even Rebels have gotten more love with the profundity. So it doesn't necessarily need help in a completely desperate situation, but at the same time, it hasn't had really any love. At any rate, its overall viability, it pretty much, of these above fleets, when you exclude cleanups, it's only really taking down Empire very successfully, and then it is being countered by the Resistance team below it, but it does steal a fair amount of banners, unless the enemy team does it perfectly, where the max you can essentially get is 70. Next up is going to be Resistance, whose main use really right now is, again, cleanups or beating the Malevolence fleet that we just saw right above it. So overall, not doing that many different things. The Comeuppance has made it better in that way. It would probably be ranked lower than First Order if it weren't for the Comeuppance, but the Comeuppance is currently in game. And what is pretty much last place for all of the modern fleets is going to be Hux. And this one does make me sad. This one makes me sad too. Because again, we got the reinforcements of the TIE Echelon, but at the same time, it hasn't been really enough for it to catch up to any of these above fleets. I mean, it can beat, again, Resistance, which is kind of the pattern we're seeing here, where Malevolence can beat Empire, Resistance can beat Malevolence, First Order can beat Resistance. But that's really where it stops, and most of its overall viability is actually in cleanup. So I do want to give a good shout out to that. One of the things that I've been having to do when it comes to taking down Executor, a lot of times, a lot of my fleets get drained trying to beat Leviathan in a 2 or 3 shot. And what I have to do is use a complete burner versus Executor, get rid of all the nice and shiny specials, and then come in with First Order, so they no longer have to take that big barrage in the very beginning, and they can kind of get control. And even if they can't win, they can typically get a few kills on the field and get me into the right direction. So definitely far from a useless fleet, but really not doing as much as a lot of the other ones are, especially when you consider that whole burning cooldowns and then coming in for a cleanup. Malevolence and Resistance actually aren't doing that terribly either, and on top of that, they're beating other fleets without having to go necessarily resort to a 2-shot. And then I guess honorable mention is going to be Akbar, which isn't really a real developed fleet. That's kind of the way we refer to Hux as the last real fleet. I mean, there's 4 rebel ships in here. They really don't have synergy. The intention, I mean, one of the things you can do is you can kind of split the ships between Profundity and Akbar. The issue is you end up with kind of 2 subpar fleets rather than having just one good fleet at the end of the day. And after that, you can't really even make any more fleets because, as you can see here, we have already exhausted every single one of the starfighters. All that being said, Thrawn and Negotiator are not worse than the bottom tier fleets here, but at the same time, if you're using Mace, you really can't use GK, and if you're using Thrawn, you're using Tarkin, you can't really use Thrawn. Again, you can interchange them here when needed. Negotiator has a little bit better win rates overall against some of the Leviathan comps, especially the ones that are lower relics with Dagger. They can come in and snipe out him right away. And when it comes to the Empire counters, Thrawn is a little bit more useful versus Negotiator when he's on defense, whereas Tarkin's a little bit more useful versus Executor. So that is going to be the updated fleets for 2025. I was really thinking that not a lot was going to change. I was very wrong. Like I said towards the beginning of the video, pretty much every position of every single fleet in here has changed, with maybe the exception of Akbar in the last year. But thank you guys for watching. Thanks for having me back. And as always, stay awesome.